You're here for IQ versus EQ leadership. And specifically, I really want to focus on what separates the elite, the extraordinary leaders from your average leaders or the rest of the pack, even your effective managers, some that are above average, because a lot of people, a lot of leaders come into their positions as elevated technicians. Maybe it's within sales or marketing, maybe IT, maybe even operations. And as a result, most will focus on the technical or the science side of leadership, which in a lot of its form is really considered management, not necessarily leadership. How do you really tap into this emotional side, the EQ or emotional intelligence, as what it's called? You've heard of IQ being, how smart you are on the intellectual side of things, but on an emotional scale, how you connect with others, how you lead and inspire people to be more than they are, to create different outcomes. That's really where the magic happens. That's where the elite leaders really excel. So today I'm going to be covering some differences between IQ and EQ leadership, but also, why EQ is really the best predictor of personal success, personal excellence, how to develop and enhance your own emotional intelligence. And then I'm going to give you some real tools that you can start applying right away. This isn't just theory. This isn't just philosophical discussion about IQ versus EQ. I'm going to give you some practical things to take away, begin using right away to really understanding your own emotions, understanding the emotions and behaviors of others, so that you can begin producing different results. Again, enhance your own leadership skills. So as I go through the content, feel free to interrupt me, type questions into the chat box. I think there's a feature to raise your hand. I'd love to speak with you and get your thoughts. So please don't be shy. Interrupt me anytime something doesn't make sense or you need further explanation on something. And then I'm going to open it up at the end for more in-depth Q&A. So let's get started here. Look at defining EQ. And so one of the big names out there, and this is a fairly early, or fairly young science and field of study, but Daniel Goleman is a name you want to know. He has multiple books out there. One of his most, I think one of his first, his most popular is Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. And this is actually lifted from Wikipedia, by the way, but a lot of material you're going to find out there really comes from Daniel Goleman. He is one of the godfathers of this arena. So EQ is the ability to monitor one's own and other people's emotions, to both discriminate between different emotions and label them appropriately. So that's really the first step to, increasing your intelligence, is being able to identify, what emotion am I feeling? What would I call this? What is this person feeling? And then using that information to guide thinking and behavior versus, the other way, which is typically, using logic or rational thinking processes to guide our behavior, and then using this consciously to create the outcomes that we want. So there's three models of EQ, three kind of big buckets, and the ability model, it really focuses on the individual's ability to process emotional information and use it to navigate the social environment. And this is more of a quantitative approach. So using, testing, research, data, and then the trait model, which is more of a qualitative approach, which more relies on self-report, behavioral dispositions, and self-perceived abilities through self-report. So, think of these as personality tests showing where you score on an aptitude of emotional intelligence, and then being able to do this by, answering long form questions, self-reporting to determine what your emotional behavioral disposition is. Now, Daniel Goleman, or the mixed model, is a combination of both the ability and trait models, and defines EQ as an array of skills and characteristics that drive leadership performance. So we're using both methods here, and this is the primary toolbox, the information that we use here with our clients, our training programs. But there's a ton of stuff, and it's only growing. So definitely do your own research, what resonates with you, how you can best understand the EQ technology. Now, going further into Daniel Goleman's work, I lifted this from his book here. Sociobiologists point to the preeminence of heart over head at such crucial moments when they conjecture about why evolution has given emotion such a central role in the human psyche. Our emotions, they say, guide us in facing, let me see if I can fix this real quick. Yeah, sorry, my lines got screwed up here, but emotions guide us in facing predicaments and tasks too important for intellect alone. So, when we're confronted with danger, or maybe, a loss, a death in our friends and family, working towards a goal with your team, frustrations, bonding with mates. So, relationships, bonding with family. There is there's more value placed on emotions and these kind of things and these kind of situations and predicaments versus just the intellect alone. So there is a evolutionary, both for social and biological reasons, value or preeminence of emotions over the intellect. Now, while our emotions have been wise guides in this evolutionary long run, the new realities that civilization presents that slow the march of evolution and cannot keep up. And so when you think of, the first laws, the 10 Commandments, the Code of Hammurabi, these schools of thought that have been created really were an attempt to harness, subdue, and domesticate emotional life. So think about that. While emotions were really used for handling with challenges and adversity, making important decisions, these schools of thoughts were really created to harness, subdue, domesticate the emotional, excess that surged too freely. So he pulled a quote from Freud that says, "Society has had to enforce from without rules meant to subdue tides of emotional excess that surge too freely within." Now, while that has some value, while that gives us some, bumper lanes and some good methods to follow, I mean, people have certainly been able to create great outcomes with their life following things like the 10 Commandments, like the Bible. And at the same time, on the other hand, when you subdue or try to domesticate emotions, now you're missing out on a big piece of, what makes us human, or a big piece of our power. And especially when you're trying to inspire, when you're trying to, excite, you can't do that with logic. You don't do that with rational thinking. The only way that you can do that is through emotions, through EQ. So it's important that we remember, again, the power, the benefit of this. And, it's interesting that science has been so down on emotions and, the heart and so enamored with the brain and rational analysis. When you really think about that, it's kind of upside down and backwards. And so the point of this and these tools that I'm giving you is to return back to remember again buy into this philosophy that it's not just all about logic and, IQ and intellect. It's really important to tap into your emotions, your EQ, understand what's happening, even make decisions, use emotions to guide your thinking and behavior. So in looking at the differences between IQ and EQ, so again, IQ being how smart we are versus our emotional fluency. Another way to think about it is rational versus intuitive. Now, Malcolm Gladwell has a great book called Blink, where he actually is making the case for why intuition, just like Daniel Goleman is making the case in his book, that emotional intelligence is even more important than IQ. Gladwell is making the case that your intuition, and a lot of times, is more effective for making quick split-second decisions. And that's why he calls it Blink, So what's your blink when you have an important decision or you're wrestling with something? What's your gut instinct? You've heard, maybe been asked that before, and there's a lot of truth to it, because your body knows, your emotions know, and a lot of times we get wrapped up in our heads. When we get analysis paralysis, so really trusting your heart, trusting your intuition. And Gladwell goes into so many different examples, of how people, saved someone's life, or they, had success with a business, or, got into a successful relationship because of these quick, intuitive actions. Head versus heart or gut instinct, another way to think about it. Doing versus being, knowing versus believing, linear versus mosaic. So while EQ people have to logically know, okay, what's the point A to B way? I really have to understand that. We're intuitive or mosaic thinkers. They just, boom, they can right away know a truth. And if they say it to an IQ-based person, well, hold on a second. I really have to understand. Logically, walk me through this process. How did you get to the conclusion here? I have to know. So you may know some people. You might be one of them who's more of a mosaic person. It's just they know they don't have to go through that linear way of thinking to arrive at a conclusion. Now, you'll see I put a line here because this is all really contained in another big subset, or another very common way that this is presented, which is masculine versus feminine. We do this in more of a relationship based kind of program or environment. Typically it's not accepted as well as IQ versus EQ, but it's the same thing. So masculine being very, and think of your stereotypes, very driven, point A to point B. It's all about competition. Feminine being more about love and connection and flow and emotion. Masculine being more intellectual, in the head. So I'm giving you these different axes to think about, so you can get a better understanding and know the distinctions between the two. This is going to come back, masculine and feminine is going to come back here in a couple of slides. But know that this is a spectrum. So it's not that one person's all EQ and no IQ, and we have, dominance on one end or the other. We all rely on one or the other more often than not. And so it's important to know where you fit on this sliding scale, where someone else fits on this sliding scale, so you can best communicate with them. Now, when we look at the average versus the rock star extraordinary CEOs, where would you say they fall on this scale of IQ and EQ? So let's take average CEOs, and you just type in the chat box, where would they fall? Are they high EQ, high IQ, low? Where do the average CEOs fall on this, do you think? And I kind of already alluded to some of this already, but I want to get a gauge here of what people think about how our leaders. So we've got a IQ, I think that's for average or higher on IQ. We've got a high EQ. average fall into IQ, rock stars are EQ. Okay, I think we're getting more IQ. You're absolutely right. Average will typically fall more on the high IQ scale, and not necessarily low, but lower on the EQ scale. Now, when you look at the rock stars, we've already had some high EQ. You're absolutely right. And the true rock stars, the true extraordinary crew, they're high on both. So again, this isn't about one's better than the other. Now I'm emphasizing more EQ here today, because it's just not as celebrated as much, especially in our culture, in our society, where EQ or IQ is valued more. EQ, our emotions are more suppressed. But the best out there, yeah, they're high on both. So they're utilizing both. They're making choices, in certain situations. Which do I do here? Am I IQ or EQ? Do I rely on my emotions versus my intellect? So this is the distinctions between IQ and EQ. Now, I said earlier that the science has really put more emphasis or celebrated more the value of IQ, but it is sort of changing. There is one really popular foundation or organization out there called HeartMath doing some really amazing things within the scientific world. A lot of research based on the functions of the heart being the center of our emotions. And so you may have actually seen this. I've seen this meme float around social media a little bit, but there's some really cool stats here. So the human heart's magnetic field can be measured several feet away from the body. So there's, just like the earth and the sun have electromagnetic fields, our body has its own electromagnetic field as well. And it's centered at the heart. And this can be measured. We have instruments to do this. It can increase or decrease in intensity. Negative emotions can create nervous system chaos. And so you can see here, it's kind of this uncoherent, messy kind of vibration, and positive emotions on the other side do the opposite. So it creates, coherence, or a, not necessarily calming, but a smooth kind of vibration. In fetal development, the heart forms and starts beating before the brain begins to develop. So again, our body knows the importance of the brain in its very early stages of development and evolution. Positive emotions can increase the brain's ability to make good decisions. So there it is. It's actually supported by science that making decisions from our emotions and heart have a lot of value. Positive emotions create physiological benefits in your body. So easing stress, when you look at chronic stress being one of the main sources of a lot of health problems, well, you really want to tap into how do I begin to change my emotional state? How do I bring in more, positive emotions to counteract the negative effects of stress, chronic stress? And you can boost your immune system by focusing on positive emotions. So lots of both physical benefits to this. And I bring this up, for an important reason, especially when we're looking at leadership. When you think that we all have an electromagnetic field, wouldn't it make sense that now our thoughts and our emotions that are affecting that field, affecting the heart's magnetic field, energetically affect other people in our environment? So the people, because it extends, several feet away from the body, and I would argue its effects are, extend even past those several feet. Well, yeah, when your field is interacting with someone else's field, people feel that. They can feel your angst. They can feel your happiness. They feel your emotional state. And so if you want to lead by example, if you want to be able to influence and impact people on another completely other level that not a lot of us are conscious of, yeah, this is Jedi mind trick type stuff here. This is where you really get to create some trippy and amazing outcomes with people, because you're doing things that are not even on someone's level of consciousness, perhaps. But again, this is why you're here. You're learning, how can I do this? How can I really tap into EQ to affect people on another in another way? Now, let me go into some really specific tools on how do we go about doing this? How do we bring more consciousness into this? So I'm going to give you another science-based, more IQ way of thinking about this. This is called the formula. And if you look here on the left, R stands for your reality, what you're experiencing. A stands for your ask or your request, and it comes in the form of a positive or a negative. So it's either a positive emotional state or a negative emotional state. EIM stands for your emotional intensity meter. That's this mythical box that's sitting in front of you on a scale of 1 to 10, gauging the intensity level of your emotions. 10 being off the scale, through the roof, 1 being the lowest it can be. And then T stands for time, or the amount of minutes, hours, however long you want to measure this, that you spend there. So in the metaphor is, let's say in the morning you spend 1 hour, getting ready, going to work. Maybe you have a little morning meditation routine, and you're manifesting a great day. And maybe your request is, money. And so typically when I see this, or I ask someone, well, show me, what do you do when you're manifesting money, for instance? And so they might go there and go, okay, money. Okay, money's flowing, money. So positive request. Now, what's my emotional intensity? Not very high, is it? So let's say it's around 2 out of 10. And I'm going to spend an hour doing that in the morning. So I've got a 2. So this R number, it's a bit arbitrary, but it makes sense when you see how it's going to compare and how you can use this to your benefit. So get to work at a 2, sit down, feeling good, open your computer, look at your email, and oh my gosh, there's an email. I can't believe this. Phoenix screwed up my order. What the heck? How could they do this? This is terrible. Oh my, this is going to be a terrible day. Boss is going to freak out. And how are we going to fix this? This is a nightmare. Now, on the negative emotional scale of things, pretty high emotional intensity, at least higher than the 2 I was at earlier. So let's give it about an 8. Now I'm going to spend the first 3 hours of my day trying to fix the problem. I'm going to go to lunch with my colleague and spend an hour, complaining about it, even at a higher emotional intensity, because they're pissed off too. And then another 2 hours, the rest of my day at work, trying to fix this problem. Multiply these together. Look where we're at now. Negative 48 compared to compared to the 2, now sitting at a negative 46. So you can see the imbalance that starts to happen throughout the day based on events, based on how we respond. Now, how do we begin to modify that? How do we manipulate and influence this? Let's say, instead of getting to work, opening up the computer, freaking out, what if it was just, wow, this is bad. This isn't good. Phoenix screwed up the order. Not the way I wanted to start my day, but I got to take care of this. It sucks, but oh well, I'll get it fixed. I'll get it handled. Now, still on the negative emotional side of things, I'm only going to spend, I'm at a lower emotional intensity, let's call it a 2, and I'm going to spend 4 hours because I'm deciding, you know what, instead of going to lunch complaining about this, I'm just going to knock it out. Then I'm going to get back to the work that excites me, that I'm inspired to do. So now we've just changed a -48 to a -8. So we're tipping the scales more in our favor now. Versus, what if I got to work, opened my computer, saw my email. Oh my God, this is amazing. I can't believe this. Phoenix screwed up my order. This is incredible. The boss is, I'm going to be the hero. The boss is going to love me. Man, I love challenges. I eat them for breakfast. This is great. Now, obviously, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I'm making an important point here, because what it depends on is how you react to the situation, the meaning that you're creating. This is how our brains operate. There's data of the world. So something happens in our environment. It's an event, it's a storm, it's something great. We create meaning. What does this mean now? Is this good, bad, you know, whatever, meh, whatever the meaning you create is, now leads to how you feel about something. That's it. You change the meaning of something, you change how you feel, you change your emotional state. You can take something that's terrible, you can take a failure and make it a positive, because you know, I get lessons, I get growth. You know, this is necessary for me and my development. So it all comes, I go into this in a whole nother, this is actually the first webinar we did, I went into this. So if you go into the archives, you can get some of this content. This is more on the IQ side of things though, but this is a huge tool for how you can begin to change your emotional states, and then, you know, map it throughout the day. So you have the line here, and, you know, maybe you spend the first 2 hours here, you know, second hours, maybe you have a little dip here. Third hour, you know, you're back to feeling better. And then you do this through the course of a day, you can see exactly, you know, what happened here, what happened there. You can see what triggers certain emotional states, and then do some work accordingly to change, you know, how you're responding to those. So the formula, a great simple way to document, gain awareness on your emotional fluctuation throughout the day. Now, we as just a culture, but really as humans, we're far better beating ourselves up than positively rewarding ourselves. And it starts early on in life, you know, and so the metaphor is, picture, you know, little Bri at play in his room. Mom comes in to check on him. She's working in the other room, comes in, checks, he's playing nicely. Okay, wipes her brow, tiptoes back, don't want to disturb, playing nicely, tiptoes back to work, goes in a second time, you know, 30 minutes later, checks in. Oh, okay, still playing nicely. Okay, shh, don't want to disturb, don't want to interrupt. Third time, checks on little Bri, and he's going to town on the walls with crayons, just Mom comes in, what's the typical response? Stop it, what are you doing? What's the matter with you? Now, you've heard the expression, bad publicity is better than no publicity at all. Well, that's very true for children, right? Because they're equating that with attention. It's equating it with some kind of love. So there's equations being set up here. There's programs being installed that, you know, bad behavior gets me attention. So, hey, you know what? And this is subconscious, unconscious equations that I'll keep doing that. I'll keep behaving poorly, versus, you know, what if Mom on the first check went in, saw little Bri playing nicely. Brian, oh my God, you're amazing. You're playing so well. Oh my God, I love you. Keep doing this. You're the best. Oh, just give me a hug. I love you so much. Mwah. I'll be back in a little bit to check on you. Just keep playing. You're doing great. So this goes into some of the, traditional psychology 101, Pavlov, positive reinforcement, but it's still valid. It's still true. Why wouldn't you positively reward or emphasize behavior you want at the same or greater than capacity or level than you do to the behavior you don't want? And so when we look at leadership and we find that, performance reviews, for instance, the first 2 minutes of an hour are spent on what you did well. The next 98 or maybe 96 or not 58 or 56 minutes are spent on what you did poorly and what you need to improve and what you suck at. And then maybe they give you a crap sandwich and finish the last 2 minutes with what you did well. So you're not getting as much. Again, when you look at the formula, you look at the imbalances, if you're not positively rewarding yourself, the people you're leading, as much then as you beat them up or criticize the work that they're doing, it's going to lead to undesirable outcomes. It's not reinforcing the actions, behaviors, thoughts of the people that you do want. So really be conscious of energizing your positive, emotionalizing this, putting in great emotions. Feel it, feel the positivity. Don't just say the words and not feel it because, hey, I have to acknowledge one thing they do well before I acknowledge the thing they don't do well. And no, those rules are great and fine, but you have to put real emotion into this and be creative with how you do this. We do this in other settings with, let's say it's a health goal, for instance, and do you say, well, do you focus on all the foods that you can't have or how much it sucks to get up in the morning early and go to the gym versus what excites you about it? What's the reward you get at the end of the tunnel? What are you gonna, do you make a bet with your friends that say, if I don't reach this goal, I pay each of you $200 and if I reach the goal, I take that money and I, go on a great shopping spree. I reward myself. You can get really creative with incentives for yourself, for others, people you're leading, to create the outcomes that you want. Now, last big tool that I want to cover, and let me take a second here before I go into this one, because I saw something come in. Lori asked, so you are saying our heart can impact other people's magnetic field? Yes, absolutely. Heart math. If you want to do a deep dive on this, go to their website. I think it's heartmath.org. You can Google it. They're doing a lot of really interesting research on this. It's science-based. They're using technology. They can study a magnetic field, someone's magnetic field. They can see intensity of it, fluctuate. They can measure your vibrations of your heart. And if you really want to go into some other great research, Joe Dispenza is doing some really interesting things in conjunction with HeartMath. They've teamed up on some studies. He'll actually do seminars where they do group meditations. They'll focus on, increasing their heart coherence, changing these vibrational levels as a group and study the effects of it. See people create amazing change in their lives after these seminars and experiences. So yeah, absolutely. You are impacting right now, even on this call, because now you want to get really deep into quantum physics, that we're connected always, all the time. There's science behind this. You can go down a real rabbit hole. I don't want to go too in depth in this today, but we certainly can. If you and I can go to, go get some coffee and we'll have a great time talking about this. So Seth says, that's why if you're a great leader, that same magnetic energy gets transferred to your staff as well, who can feel it too. Yes, absolutely. This is happening on a level, again, that a lot of people aren't very conscious of. Once you start to become aware of it, once you approach it from a different point of view, a different consciousness, you're going to start seeing amazing things happen. You're going to start seeing people respond to you differently just by, managing your own emotional state. Because remember, the emotional state is the source, the energy, what's creating this field around you. So very interesting stuff. Highly recommend taking a deep dive on your own time, or if you want, you can continue with us. I'll show you how you can further this education within our own programs that we have here too, if you want to continue your work here with me. So now, I mentioned earlier masculine versus feminine. Again, because this is more we use that more in a relationship setting. Interchange this with IQ versus EQ. I'm not hung up on the words. It's the same thing. It's just like saying yin versus yang, and so while masculine and feminine isn't typically accepted as much because maybe there's, PC issues, or people make it about gender, genitalia, it is not that, because we all have both. We all have both masculine and feminine characteristics and energies. And just like with IQ, EQ, we're more dominant on one side or the other. So typically speaking, generally, stereotypically speaking, men are going to have more masculine tendencies and energy, and women will have more feminine tendencies and energy. Now, it can be vice versa. Everyone's different. And so don't make this about man versus woman, but I'm going to give you an example so that this can really make sense. Now, let's say the feminine being, let's in this example call it a woman, has been at home all day, been in the kitchen, really wants to go to P.F. Chang's for dinner, and her masculine counterpart comes home, says, hey, what would you like to do tonight? What are we going to do for dinner? Or just doesn't even ask the question, and feminine says, gosh, I've just been in the kitchen all day. It's been a really long day. And man, the kids have just been in and out, and they've just been driving me nuts in this damn kitchen. I've had enough of it. That's, how pure feminine would, what we call, invite masculine to make a decision. Because remember, masculine is all about drive, point A to point B. It's about problem solving. It's about intellect, it's logic. So if feminine were to say, you know what, I want to go to P.F. Chang's, can we go to P.F. Chang's? That wouldn't really be an invitation. That's more of a command, an order. I'm telling you, this is what's happening. We're doing this. So what does this possibly have to do with corporate leadership and business? Because let's say a marketing VP, comes in the office excited, has a brilliant idea for the business, says, hey boss, check this out. I want to do this, and it's going to take this, and here's what I expect we can rate. Now, the CEO has been around the block a few times, already knows, can kind of see the end here, knows that this idea is most likely, high probability, not going to work out. Now, what would an IQ-based person, do you think, in this metaphor, do when presented, when they have an employee come to them, excited, business idea, wanting to do something? What would an IQ-based manager or leader typically do in this situation? So remember, there's I want to go to P.F. Chang's versus how can I invite them to take me to PF Chang's. Gloria says, we don't have the budget. Yep, that's one great example. And I want to hear from maybe one or two others, because I really want you to think about this. An IQ-based leader already knows it's going to fail, can already see X, Y, and Z factors. Yeah, Kathleen says why it's not a good idea. They want the data. Yeah, Lori, great point. Yeah, so they're gonna go into the reasons why they can't. Hey, listen, we're short staffed. We're working remotely. That's just not going to work right now. We don't have the budget. Hey, have you thought about this? And I see a really big obstacle and roadblock down the road here. So yeah, you already know, I think Marie knows where I'm going with this. What would an EQ based on emotion, based on inspiration, based on invitation do in that moment? Now remember, already knows, they know too that high probability it's not going to work out, but EQ based, what do? What would be the opposite, the flip side? Marie says, make it their idea by the power of suggestion. Yeah. Listen to their idea. Yeah. Ask questions to get them to realize why it won't work. Interesting. Ask the marketing VP to hash it out. I would suggest their favorite dish at PF Chang's. That's it. That's flirting with the edge there. Because again, Masson's going to hear, hey, what do you think about that one dish we had a couple weeks ago? The snow peas, the snap, or the sesame chicken, the lettuce wraps, and weren't those amazing? There's going to be a light bulb like ding, ding, ding. Oh, PF Chang's. Hey, honey, let's go to PF Chang's. So you're flirting with the edge there. That's close, but I love it. But it would come in the form of, for the PF Chang's example, again, this kitchen, I'm done with the kitchen. I need to get out of the kitchen. Now, here's something interesting, because I'm going to come back to this point here in a second. Within this metaphor, what happens if masculine or IQ says, and they make the decision, honey, put your best dress on, put your best clothes. We're going to Del Frisco's for dinner. Is feminine pissed off that they don't get PF Chang's? Or if they're really about flow and connection and love, aren't they just happy that they get a great evening with their masculine counterpart? That they get to just have a great time and flow and be all about love and connection. So think about that. This one's going to probably have your wheels spinning for the rest of the day here. We have a lot of fun with this one. I've had a lot of pushback, had a lot of discussions and challenges with this one, but yeah, it doesn't matter what the decision is or if it's PF Chang's versus Del Frisco's. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't ever have PF Chang's and you can't ever be masculine and say, hey, we're going to PF Chang's. It's consciousness. This slide, this particular concept is about invitation. So if you're inviting your person, your employee, the person you're leading to show up and take charge and make decisions and be more than they are and inspire and excite, yeah, you wouldn't shut it down. You wouldn't say, you haven't thought about this and that, and here's why I won't. It's I love it. Great idea, man. I love your passion. I love your excitement. This is what I want to see more of. It's back to rewarding the behavior you want to see. I love the initiative you're taking. This is great. Let's see how it can work. How can I support you? They're going to be so empowered. They're going to leave that office feeling so awesome about themselves, so excited to make this work. And hey, heck, maybe they prove you wrong. Maybe it works. Now, what happens if it fails? Why would an EQ-based leader, even if they know it's probably a failure, why would they let it happen? Because just like the point I made earlier, this means lessons and growth. And that person's going to get far more out of that experience than they would by you saying, commanding, directing in a more IQ based way why this isn't going to work out. So it's a win-win. It's a win-win world. You're inviting them and empowering them to be more than they are. Now, if you're still having troubles with this, let's say your child comes to you, animated, excited, same passion, has a business idea. Maybe it's a lemonade stand. Would you ever say, well, honey, look, this side of town isn't great, and that corner, it's not going to work out. There's just not a lot of foot traffic, and I don't think we should do that. You wouldn't ever say that to a child. You wouldn't shut their excitement and passion down. You'd be like, awesome, I love it. Let's go have a great time outside. Let's see what happens. And they're going to learn from it. They're going to grow. And even if it's not, successful by your terms, they're going to have a great time doing it. So, this isn't cut and dry. This is an art. This isn't a science. Obviously, there's times where if you see this is just going to be a complete catastrophe, and it's risking the fate of the business, you're going to step in and say, look, I love your passion, but we just can't do that. We can't afford it, and here's because we've tried this in the past, and blah, whatever you're going to say, but you're still going to be wanting to maintain and celebrate their passion and excitement. Another metaphor with children: if a kid's standing in the middle of the street, are you gonna and a car's barreling down about to hit them, are you gonna stand on the sidewalk, feminine, inviting, come on over here, you can do it? Or are you gonna rush out, take action, take that direction, point A to point B, grab them, and then when you're on the side of the road is where you get to be like, oh my gosh, I was so worried about you. Are you okay? I love you. Never do that to me. Always look both ways. And you're back to love and connection and supporting them. So hopefully you're seeing by this real world metaphor example how these things kind of come into play, and how an EQ based leader invites, and inspires their people to show up, be more than they are, and take action. And also, the fact that IQ does have a lot of value in the right scenario. EQ's touchy-feely for a lot of people, but it's the most powerful frameworks to get what you want. So, I encourage you, cannonball in, especially in moments of crisis. Really rely on your EQ and emotions, see what happens. And remember that at the end of the day, it's not our achievements, it's not our success that creates our destiny. It's how we feel, how we make others feel, along the journey. The great Maya Angelou quote: people will forget what you said, what you did. They never forget how you make them feel. So focus on that, create, who you want to be, how you want others to feel, and watch your leadership take off.